Have you ever gotten that feeling, that sudden ice-cold drop in your stomach when you just know your life is about to change forever? That's exactly what hit me on a quiet Tuesday morning in March of 1849. I was just an ordinary guy living in a modest boarding house for the past 3 years. And then the telegram arrived. My hands trembled as I read the ink-stained words. It was brief, unnervingly brief. Your uncle Cornelius Ravencrest, deceased. You are named sole heir. Presence required immediately at Ravencrest Mansion, Louisiana. I hadn't seen my uncle in nearly 15 years, not since I was a 12-year-old boy. My mother had sent me to his plantation for one strange, uncomfortable summer, and she never fully explained why. All I had left of that place were fragmented nightmares. I remembered the oppressive, suffocating heat, the sickly sweet smell of magnolias mixing with something much darker, and my uncle's cold, dead, gray eyes just watching me from across the table. My mother passed away 2 years ago, taking whatever dark family secrets we had to her grave. And now, at 27 years old, I was the sole inheritor of a fortune I never asked for and a past I barely understood. The journey down south took 5 grueling days by coach and riverboat. The orderly, clean streets of the Northeast faded away, quickly replaced by the wild, untamed tangle of the bayou. The trees out there were ancient, dripping with Spanish moss that hung from the branches like shredded funeral shrouds. The air didn't just feel hot, it was thick, humid. It pressed against my skin like a damp, suffocating cloth. When I finally arrived at the small, isolated town of Houma, the local attorney was waiting for me at the dock. His name was James Caldwell. He was a thin man in his 50s, wearing a pitch-black suit despite the blistering heat. His eyes darted around, assessing everything. His handshake was brief, almost dismissive. "Your uncle was quite wealthy," Caldwell muttered as our carriage bumped along the rough, secluded road toward the estate. We were surrounded by a tunnel of green shadows, the dense vegetation leaning in from both sides as if trying to swallow us whole. I looked at him. What sort of complications? Caldwell swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Your uncle was not well liked in the community. There were rumors, several disappearances over the years. The authorities investigated, naturally, but nothing was ever proven." A chill ran down my spine, despite the sweltering evening air. "And how did he die?" I asked. Caldwell refused to look me in the eye. He, his wife, and their 3 children were all found dead in the dining room. The coroner ruled it poisoning, but there were aspects of the scene that troubled many who saw it. Before I could ask what he meant, the carriage broke through the tree line. And there it was, Ravencrest Mansion. It rose out of the swampland like some decaying Gothic cathedral. 3 massive stories of dark brick and rusted iron. The tall windows caught the very last rays of the dying sun, turning the glass a deep, reflective blood red. But the most unsettling part was the atmosphere of pure decay. Paint was violently peeling off the shutters. Windows were shattered. The mansion looked as though it had been rotting away for years, not weeks. "The servants left immediately after the deaths," Caldwell explained, his voice shaking slightly. "They absolutely refused to stay another night in that house." As I stepped down from the carriage, my boots sank into the soft, muddy earth. The smell hit me like a physical punch. It smelled like rotting vegetation mixed with something sweet and cloying that immediately made my stomach turn. Caldwell produced a heavy iron key and unlocked the front door. It swung open with a long, agonizing groan that echoed through the pitch-black entry hall. "I've taken the liberty of having the bodies removed and buried," Caldwell said, his voice bouncing off the empty walls. "But the dining room remains exactly as it was found. I thought you might want to see it." Every survival instinct in my body screamed at me to refuse, to turn around, get back in the carriage, and never look back. But my curiosity was like a fishhook caught in my brain, dragging me forward. We walked through a series of dark, freezing rooms until we reached a pair of heavy wooden doors at the back of the house. Caldwell paused, his hand trembling slightly on the brass knob. "I should prepare you," he whispered. "The scene is disturbing." He pushed the doors open. The dining room was enormous, but the food rotting on the table wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. It was the walls. They were completely covered in writing. From the floorboards to the ceiling, every single inch of plaster was marked with desperate, manic scribbles. Some of it was written in charcoal. Some of it was violently scratched directly into the plaster. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs, and read the words scratched nearest to me. "The price must be paid. The covenant cannot be broken. They are watching from below. The soil remembers." "We believe your uncle wrote these in the days before his death," Caldwell said quietly. I kept scanning the walls. More horrifying phrases stood out with terrifying clarity. "The basement must never be opened. Forgive me for what I have done to them." At the far end of the room, deeply scratched into the wall near the kitchen door, I found a list of names. Samuel, Marie, Joseph. 7 names spanning across 13 years. "Enslaved workers who simply vanished," Caldwell whispered from behind me. "I think something terrible happened in this house, Thomas. Something that ultimately consumed your uncle and his family." The house was dead silent. But then I heard it. It was faint at first, but as I stood perfectly still, the sound grew clearer. It sounded almost like heavy, labored breathing, and it was coming from somewhere deep beneath our feet. "There's a basement," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Caldwell replied, his eyes wide with fear. "But your uncle kept it locked. The sheriff came to investigate, but the men he brought refused to break the lock. They said approaching that door made them physically ill." Without another word, I pushed past him, heading straight toward the kitchen hallway. "Thomas, please," Caldwell pleaded. "Sell this cursed place and forget you ever came here. Let the past stay buried." But I couldn't stop. I walked to the very end of the narrow, unlit hallway, and there it was, a heavy oak door, reinforced with iron bands, secured by an enormous padlock that looked more suited for a prison cell than a home. As I drew near, the temperature in the hallway plummeted. I could smell it now, damp earth mixed with something indescribable that triggered pure, instinctive panic in my brain. I reached out and placed my bare hand against the freezing wood of the door, and I felt it. The door was vibrating, a slow, steady pulse against my palm, as if the basement itself was alive. I couldn't stay in that house a second longer. Not with that door pulsating under my hand. I told Caldwell I needed a few days to explore the property alone. He looked incredibly relieved, practically shoving me into the carriage, telling me he had arranged a room for me at a boarding house in town. As we rode away in the fading light, I couldn't help but look back at the mansion. It loomed against the darkening sky like a monument to pure evil. And I swear to you, in one of the upper windows, I saw a pale shape moving behind the glass. By the time I blinked and looked again, it was gone, just the reflection of the rising moon. That night, Lying in the unfamiliar bed at the boarding house, I couldn't sleep. Outside my window, an alligator bellowed in the distance, a deep, guttural sound that echoed across the still night air like a warning. Staring at the ceiling, my mind drifted back 15 years to that one strange summer I had spent at the mansion as a boy. Suddenly, a suppressed memory clawed its way to the surface. I remembered wandering through the empty house while my uncle was away. I had found that exact same basement door, but back then it had been slightly open. I remembered hearing sounds coming from the pitch-black void below, voices, but they weren't speaking. They were making wet, horrific noises that no human throat should ever be capable of producing. Then my uncle grabbed me. He dragged me away with surprising violence, his face completely drained of color. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. His fingers dug so hard into my shoulders that they bruised. "Promise me, boy," he hissed at me. "Swear on your mother's life that you will never try to see what's down there." I promised, but I wasn't a frightened child anymore. I returned to Ravencrest Mansion at dawn, long before Caldwell was supposed to meet me. The morning mist clung to the ground, making the massive house look like it was floating above the swamp. I brought a lantern, a hammer, and a heavy iron crowbar. I was getting into that basement today, one way or another. When I stepped onto the porch, my stomach dropped. The heavy front door was standing slightly ajar. I knew we had pulled it shut the night before. I pushed it open slowly. The house was completely silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of something holding its breath. Every shadow in the entryway felt like it was watching me. I went straight up to my uncle's study on the second floor to search for the key. His massive mahogany desk was buried with papers, ledgers, and bizarre diagrams showing heavy industrial pumps and chains. But then I found a smaller ledger hidden away in a locked drawer that I had to pry open. It wasn't a financial record. It was a log of experiments. My hands shook violently as I read his precise, clinical handwriting. June 15th, 1835. First attempt. Subject expired within 3 hours. Inadequate preparation. October 3rd, 1836. Modified procedure. Subject lasted 6 days. Progress, but still insufficient. March 12th, 1839. Breakthrough. Subject maintained for 3 weeks before complications. He wasn't running a normal plantation. He had been taking people, those 7 missing names written on the dining room wall, and doing something unspeakable to them. But it was the very last entry, written just 2 weeks before the entire family was wiped out, that made my blood run cold. The handwriting wasn't neat anymore. It was manic, desperate. February 15th, 1849. They are aware the price is coming due. I thought I could contain it, control it, but I was a fool. The covenant was not a negotiation. It was a sentence. They are coming up. God forgive me for what I have unleashed. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed from downstairs, like a heavy door closing. I froze, barely breathing. I was completely alone in this massive, silent structure, or at least I thought I was. I quickly moved into my uncle's master bedroom. Unlike the neat and tidy downstairs, this room was utterly destroyed. Clothes were scattered everywhere. Heavy furniture was violently overturned. On the walls, more desperate phrases were scrawled in charcoal. They speak in my dreams now. They show me what I have become. Hidden behind a false panel inside the wardrobe, I found a wooden box containing old, yellowed letters from my mother. I unfolded one, dated in 1834. Cornelius, I am begging you to reconsider this path. Our father warned us both about the family legacy. You speak of wealth and power as if they had worth any price, but I have seen what that price does to a soul. Some doors are meant to remain closed. My mother had known. Whatever dark, twisted legacy my great-grandfather had started, Cornelius had continued it, and she had spent her entire life trying to protect me from it. At the bottom of the ruined nightstand, wrapped tightly in an old oilcloth, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out, a massive, heavy black iron key. The handle was ornately shaped like a spiral descending into darkness. Every instinct I had screamed at me to throw the key out the window and run far away from this cursed property. But I couldn't. Those 7 people, if they had been murdered and their bodies were still rotting in that basement, they deserved to be found. I gripped my lantern, grabbed my crowbar, and made my way back down to the first floor, past the manic scribbles in the dining room, down the freezing, narrow hallway. I stood in front of the heavy oak door. The lock felt like a block of solid ice beneath my fingers. I slid the black iron key into the padlock. It slid in perfectly smooth, as if someone had recently oiled it. I turned it. Click. The sound echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. I removed the heavy lock, placing it quietly on the floor. I put my hand on the metal handle and listened. From the other side of the door, I heard it again, soft, rhythmic, like heavy breathing, mixing with the sound of thick water moving through rusted pipes. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. A violent rush of freezing, damp air hit my face. It smelled like wet earth, decay, and formaldehyde. I raised my lantern, the flickering light revealing steep, glistening brick stairs leading into absolute suffocating darkness. I gripped the iron crowbar in my hand and took my first step down. I took my first step down into the pitch-black void. The stone stairs went down much farther than I had ever anticipated. 30 steps, then 40, then 50. With every step I took, the temperature plummeted, and that horrible sound from below grew louder. It wasn't breathing anymore. It was a wet, sliding sound, like something massive and grotesque dragging itself through deep mud. When I finally reached the bottom, I raised my lantern high into the air, and my breath hitched in my throat. The basement was absolutely enormous, extending far beyond the actual footprint of the house above. It was supported by thick brick columns that disappeared into the endless, suffocating dark. But it was what filled the space that made my blood run ice cold. Cages. Dozens of heavy 6-foot iron cages arranged in long, terrifying rows. Their doors hung wide open, but the signs of recent occupation were horrifically clear. I saw matted straw bedding, overturned water dishes, and dark, rusted stains completely soaking the stone floor, stains that could only be blood. Between the rows of iron cages sat long wooden workbenches. They were covered in surgical instruments, glass vials, beakers, and heavy chains. Against the far wall, a massive industrial filtration pump was hooked up to thick metal pipes that plunged straight down through the floorboards. Into the bayou. The house was built on pilings directly above the swamp, and these pipes extended deep into the dark, murky water below. I slowly approached one of the workbenches and picked up a leather-waved notebook. It was filled with my uncle's precise handwriting, But the entries weren't manic. They were clinically detached, like a scientist casually observing a crushed insect. Subject 7, Isaiah, shows remarkable resilience to the transformation, maintained coherence for 47 hours before complete deterioration. Transformation. The word hung in my mind like a curse. I kept reading, my stomach violently turning with every page. My uncle had been secretly holding enslaved workers captive. He was running unspeakable, agonizing experiments on them, pumping them with God knows what to somehow enhance them, to make them stronger, more durable laborers. But it had never worked. Every single subject either died a slow, agonizing death or mutated into something monstrous, something completely inhuman. The final entries, written just days before the family was wiped out, were pure, unfiltered terror. March 1st, 1849. They are changing in ways I did not anticipate. The transformation does not end. Even after death, the process continues. I have tried to dispose of the bodies, but the swamp will not take them. They sink into the water, and then something brings them back. I hear them beneath the house, scratching at the pilings. They want payment for what I did to them, and they will not stop until they have it. Suddenly, a sound from upstairs shattered the dead silence, the heavy slam of a door, then footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. Someone else was in the house, and they knew exactly where they were going. Panic seized my chest. I immediately extinguished my lantern, plunging myself into total suffocating darkness, and pressed my back hard against the freezing brick wall beside the stairs. I held my breath. The footsteps walked through the kitchen, paused, and then started descending the basement steps. A faint orange glow from a lantern appeared, casting long, terrifying shadows across the stone walls. A woman stepped into the chamber. She was middle-aged, holding a cloth bag that clinked softly as she moved. She walked straight past the cages, completely unfazed, and set her lantern down by the massive water pipes. "I know you're down here," she said suddenly, her voice echoing off the damp brick. She didn't even look in my direction. "I saw you arrive this morning. You're the nephew, aren't you?" I slowly stepped out of the shadows and relit my lantern. "Who are you?" I demanded. She turned to face me, her eyes filled with years of unbearable suffering. "My name is Marie Beaumont. I was married to Samuel. He was the first one your uncle took." The floor felt like it was dropping out from underneath me. Samuel, the first name scratched on the dining room wall upstairs. She told me she had spent 14 years searching for his body. She revealed that my family's dark legacy went back generations. My own great-grandfather had started these twisted experiments in Boston, using a strange chemical compound found deep in the bayou water to alter living tissue. My uncle was just continuing the sick, unnatural tradition. "The changes it caused were unpredictable," she whispered, staring at the dark water pooling beneath the floorboards, "and they didn't stop at death." I stared at her, horrified. "You're saying they're still alive down here?" "I'm saying there's still something," she replied, her voice trembling. Before I could say another word, the room went dead silent. Then we heard it, that wet, sliding sound. But this time it wasn't far away. It was right at the edge of the lantern's light. And with it came a voice. It was horribly distorted, bubbling with thick liquid as if speaking underwater, but it was definitely human speech. "Marie." Marie's face completely drained of color. "Samuel?" she whispered, tears instantly filling her eyes. From the absolute darkness, something dragged itself forward. It might have once been a man. Its skin was a sickly gray-green, hanging loosely on a frame that looked like it was partially dissolved. Its bones moved with a horrific, unnatural fluidity, as if they had turned to soft cartilage. The creature fixed its dead, filmed-over eyes on Marie. It slowly raised a misshapen, rotting hand towards her. "Marie," it gurgled, its voice thick and wet. "You came. After so long, you came." I stood there, completely paralyzed, staring at the nightmare dragging itself out of the black water. Its skin had taken on a sickly gray-green cast, hanging loosely on a frame that seemed partially dissolved. Its bones moved with a horrible fluidity, as if they had turned to soft cartilage. Marie fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Oh God, Samuel, what did he do to you?" The creature that had once been her husband looked down at her with dead, filmed-over eyes. "He tried to make us better, stronger." Samuel's voice gurgled, a wet, suffocating sound. "But it went wrong. We changed, kept changing. Even after we died, we changed, trapped beneath the water in the dark. 7 of us, Marie. 7 souls damned to this existence." And then the water behind him began to violently bubble. 6 other shapes emerged from the pitch-black depths. Each one was as malformed, as twisted, and as horrific as Samuel. They moved slowly, deliberately, completely surrounding Marie and me. One of them pointed a long, distorted, rotting finger straight at my chest. "You are his blood, his nephew, his heir. Will you continue his work? Will you bring more subjects to join us in our torment?" I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it would burst. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I swear to you, I will not continue anything." The creatures stared at me in absolute terrifying silence. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Then burn it," he demanded. "Burn this house and everything in it. Salt the earth where it stood. Let the place of our suffering be erased from the earth." "I swear I will," I promised. Satisfied, the 7 twisted shapes slowly slid back into the freezing water with barely a splash, disappearing into the dark. Marie and I stumbled out of that house, gasping for fresh air. But keeping my promise wasn't going to be easy. When I told the attorney, James Caldwell, that I was going to burn the most valuable property in the parish to the ground, he called me insane. He told me creditors and business partners would sue to stop me. We needed proof, undeniable, horrific proof. 3 days later, we returned to Ravencrest Mansion, but this time we brought the local law. Sheriff Beauregard LeBautrin and 2 heavily armed deputies. The moment we opened the basement door, the deputies instinctively reached for their weapons. The smell of rotting death was completely overwhelming. But when we reached the bottom of the stairs, the basement had changed. The 7 iron cages that were completely empty the day before were now occupied. Inside each cage sat an arrangement of human bones, 7 severely deteriorated, horribly modified skeletons. My uncle had kept them alive, experimenting on them until they rotted, tossing their remains into the cages while their mutated souls festered in the water below. The sheriff's face went pale. "Mother of God," he breathed. Before anyone could say another word, a loud splash echoed through the massive chamber. The water pooling on the stone floor erupted. The 7 dripping, malformed shapes rose from the cracks in the foundation, surrounding the terrified lawmen. The deputies drew their guns, trembling violently, but the sheriff, completely paralyzed by fear and awe, told them to hold their fire. For the next hour, in that freezing, blood-stained basement, the creatures confessed to everything. They told the sheriff how they found a way to squeeze up through the walls of the mansion, like water moving through cracks. They confessed that they were the ones who murdered my uncle and his family in the dining room. "We did not kill them quickly," Samuel's distorted voice echoed. "We wanted them to understand, to feel a fraction of what we had endured." My uncle, terrified out of his mind, had realized there was no escape. He had fed his own wife and children arsenic to spare them from the unimaginable torture the creatures were about to inflict. That was all the sheriff needed to hear. He immediately sealed the basement, declaring Ravencrest Mansion anathema, a place of pure, unholy evil. With the entire town watching from a safe distance, they set the mansion on fire. The flames burned brutally hot and fast, engulfing the dark brick from the foundation to the roof. As I stood there watching my cursed inheritance turn to ash, I felt no regret, only relief. But as the flames reached their violent peak, something incredible happened. Rising up through the thick black smoke, floating above the burning basement, were 7 translucent shapes. They weren't twisted or monstrous anymore. They were completely restored to their human forms. I watched as Samuel looked down at Marie one final time, a look of pure peace on his face, before all 7 of them dissolved into the sky, finally freed from their torment. By morning, nothing remained of Ravencrest Mansion but blackened stones and ash. The bishop salted the earth, forbidding anything from being built there for 7 years. But the nightmare wasn't entirely over. I soon discovered that my great-grandfather's sick research had spread. He had shared his twisted methods with a network of deranged scientists across the entire country. I couldn't just walk away. Marie and I spent the rest of our lives hunting down those hidden laboratories. We found an abandoned mill in Vermont where Irish immigrants were butchered, a sanitarium in New York hiding human experiments behind closed doors. We formed an organization called the Covenant of Witnesses, dedicating our lives to shutting down these dark places and giving the forgotten victims a proper burial. Years later, Marie and I returned to the empty, salted lot where Ravencrest once stood. To our absolute shock, the dead earth was completely covered in a beautiful riot of wild purple irises and white lilies. Nature had healed the scars of my uncle's evil. Right in the center of the ruins, we planted a young live oak tree. Decades passed. I grew into an old man. I returned to Louisiana one final time. The oak tree we planted had grown massive, its thick branches spreading wide over a peaceful memorial park. Local children were running and laughing in the grass, completely unaware of the absolute horrors that had occurred right beneath their feet. And that is exactly how it should be. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the bayou, I sat down on a bench beneath the oak tree. I felt a presence beside me. I turned my head. It was Marie, but she wasn't elderly. She looked young and full of life, just as she had been when we first met. She smiled at me with perfect understanding and peace. I closed my eyes, and in my final moments on this earth, as the sun disappeared below the horizon, I saw 7 figures standing beneath the oak tree. They were whole, they were human, and they were smiling down at me. Then they faded into the dusk, and I finally let go, drifting away into the peaceful dark.